Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Stewardship Mapping and Assessment Project of Southeastern New England. It's a mouthful, kickoff meeting. So I just wanted to sort of begin with some housekeeping. In terms of using Zoom during this presentation, you can feel free to turn your video on or leave it off. That's up to you. We will keep you muted throughout the presentation. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please enter it into the chat. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. At that time, we'd ask that you enter your comment in the chat or use the raised hand function, and we'll be happy to engage in a dialogue around your questions. So again, welcome to the StewMap Southeastern New England kickoff meeting. Since we're focused on stewardship, we actually thought we would begin with defining stewardship, with talking about stewardship. And so here I just wanted to give you a couple examples. Stewardship broadly is defined in this project as groups that conserve, manage, monitor, transform, educate, and or advocate for the environment, in this case across southeastern New England. So examples include urban farms that may identify as groups that manage or educate around the environment. These can also include tree planting groups that seek to transform the environment, or monitoring groups, for example, groups in Los Angeles that monitor the health of trees. So one of our ideas for today is to keep this a little bit interactive and hopefully interesting for you all. So we have a series of poll questions that we're going to ask that you engage in to sort of kick us off and keep you motivated. So I will launch this first poll. And in this poll, we ask you two questions. You should see this on your screen now. The first question for you all is roughly how many stewardship groups do you think worked in New York City in 2017? And the second question has to do with the southeastern region, New England region. Roughly how many stewardship groups do you think worked in the southeastern New England region in 2020? All right, I'll give just a few more seconds here. This is actually great. You all are great students. You're answering the polls. I'm actually very impressed. All right, looks like we've gotten to a good point here where I'll stop the polling. All right, looks like the majority of folks that answered this poll said about 1,700. And actually the correct answer for groups that were identified by the research team that sought responses from groups throughout New York City in 2017 is 7,000, over roughly 7,000. So a really large set of actors in New York exist or existed at that time. In terms of our answer, we for the second question, we don't know, and that's sort of the sort of fun aspect of this project and what we're really excited about. So we're really looking forward to learning more about the stewardship groups that exist, which many of you represent. Okay, in terms of the agenda for today, we'll actually begin, though I've already begun and engaged you in some polls. We'll begin with a bit of an introduction to the project and explicitly to the SNEP network. We'll introduce StewMap and the Southeastern New England project, including the team, our project questions, some of the benefits that we think about in relation to the project, and the timeline of this project, which has been ongoing. We'll provide some examples and again some interactivity at the end, and that will essentially conclude the formal part of the presentation. It should be about 30 minutes in total. And then we'll leave about 15 minutes for an optional question and discussion period. So feel free to stay on and as I mentioned at the beginning, unmute yourself and ask questions or enter your questions in the comments. We did receive about 6 questions ahead of this presentation, the registration, and we're happy to reply to those as well. Okay, so we just wanted to first introduce the team. So Lynn, if you'd be willing to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lynn Carlson. I'm the Geographic Information Systems Manager at the Environmental and Remote Technologies Lab at Brown University. My role in the project is to oversee the survey responses as they come in, and also to ensure that the technical aspects of the survey continue to work properly. Once the survey data collection phase is concluded, then I'll be helping with some of the data cleaning and with the development of the maps and the other visualizations that we plan on sharing with you. Back to you, Bryce.
Thanks, Lynn. Had a mute problem. So I've been speaking already, but just to introduce myself, I'm Bryce Dubois. I'm an assistant professor in the History, Philosophy, and Social Sciences concentration at RISD and a member of this project team. And Jesse?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Jesse Sales. I'm an ORISE postdoctoral fellow appointed with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Research and Development down in the Narragansett lab. Well, you'll be hearing a little bit more from me throughout the presentation. Kurt.
Yes, I had to unmute too. My name is Kurt Spalding. I hope some of you know who I am from my 10-year working on environmental stewardship and education in this region. I am now with Brown University Institute at Brown for Environment and Society. Been there now for nearly 3 years. And prior to that, I was the regional administrator of EPA New England under the Obama administration. And prior to that, I ran Save the Bay for a good long time, nearly 20 years. So I guess my role in this is just I have deep familiarity with the region and the work across the region, and a good idea what we're trying to do here in terms of advancing stewardship and environmental protection.
Thanks, Kurt and Lynn and Jesse. So this makes up the primary project team. We are supported by a number of individuals at the Urban Field Station in New York, Erica Svensson, Lindsay Campbell, and Michelle Johnson. And I'm sorry that I didn't also include Sophie Pitt, who is the STUMAP coordinator. Sophie, I saw that you're on this call, and I apologize for not including your name here. That was a major oversight on my part. I hope you'll accept those apologies. In addition to that research team, we actually are pleased to announce that we've been able to onboard 3 research assistants to help us out with the project, and so they'll actually each of them are beginning to work with us in the coming weeks. They include Casey Merkel, who's a master's student at RISD, Shreya Kaipa, also a student at Rhode Island School of Design, and Ben Myers, who's a student in public policy at Brown University. So we're really excited to have each of them join us and really innovate and energize the project. All right, Kurt?
Well, I think Bryce has asked me, and I think it's important for you all to appreciate the context for which we're moving forward with this STUMAP project. A little bit about the Southern New England Network and the Southern New England program to begin with. So when I was sitting in the chair running EPA in this region, it became clear that this region, the Southern New England region, did not have the kind of geographic focus that other parts of the New England coast did. For example, the Long Island Sound study covered that whole area from New York, basically to Rhode Island. And then if you look to the Gulf of Maine, there's the Gulf of Maine Initiative, which is primarily run by states for that area. So there's a hole in the Southern New England area, and we were able to convince members of Congress to put money behind the idea that we need to knit together a geographic program for this part of the part of New England. And with that point in mind, we took a different approach, emphasizing innovation and connection to stewardship. With my background, I understood very deeply just how the non-governmental organizations, local government, land trusts, others, all knitted together to create perhaps one of the strongest stewardship commitments there is in the US. I used to like to say that if there's a body of water in New England, there's somebody who cares about it and somebody who's organized to do something to save it. And that recognition is what's driven the development of the Southern New England Network, a network that's designed to really build capacity and capability across all the actors that are trying to save and restore this area of New England. So that's the background. I think it's important, and the map kind of shows it. What distinguishes this work, and Jesse can speak to it later, but what really distinguishes this stewardship project is that it deals with a big geography, a defined geography of watersheds. It also connects to existing efforts to save bodies of water, like the Narragansett Bay Project or the Buzzards Bay study, and those local or regional efforts to push restoration forward. But this isn't about that, the idea of a government program pushing restoration. This is about empowerment and building capacity and capability across the network of stewards and stewardship activity in this region. We stop here, Bryce, and go from there?
Thanks, Kurt. So let's talk a little bit more about the project itself. Jesse?
Yeah, thank you guys. Okay, so thank you so much, Kurt. And let's actually define exactly what StewMap is. StewMap is a survey and public database designed to help map stewardship activities in networks with the goal of strengthening community capacity for stewardship. And the StewMap essentially addresses the kinds of questions such as who takes care of a given region, where are there gaps and where are there concentrations of care, where are groups working on what issues, and who is working on, in a given community or on a given topic. And so we'll go to the next slide, Bryce. And we asked you guys when you were registering what interested you about the StewMap. And so we've actually put together a word cloud here where the larger words represent those words that were more commonly used in people's responses. And some of the big words that you're seeing in this word cloud may just simply reflect the topic, such as stewardship and network. But if we look at some of the other words in here, like maybe similar in approach, this might hint at the fact that people are really interested to know what other people are doing, what might be opportunities for collaboration. And that's really what the StewMap project is all about. So we'll go on. We'll go on to the benefits of StewMap. Some of the benefits are to try and increase collaboration by identifying ways to share information, ideas, and other resources with groups, nonprofits, and agencies. To support community capacity to learn from experts across the region, to help stewards develop stronger funding proposals, and to visualize stewardship with maps and diagrams in a given neighborhood, city, and region. And later on, we'll actually show you some examples of those maps and diagrams. But I think what's also really important to remember here is that there are, as Kurt alluded to, many community and civic groups that care for our lands and waters, and that these groups are vital to the health and well-being of our communities, but many of their activities are often undervalued because there's just not a lot of information about the stewardship action that's going on in a given area. And so StewMap is really designed to help overcome this and to show the many ways that people care for the southeastern New England region. So Bryce, we'll go to the next one. Bryce talked about the StewMap team being originated with the U.S. Forest Service in New York. StewMap as a concept and approach has been done in many cities throughout the US and internationally, as you can see on the map here. Traditionally, StewMap has tended to focus on a specific city and taking that as sort of the geographic bound. And as Kurt mentioned at the beginning, ours is a little different. It's probably, I think certainly is the largest geographic scope for any STUMAP project. And it goes beyond urban boundaries. And I think that's really important because, you know, I think we all know that environmental processes don't stop at jurisdictional borders. And communities, cities, towns, counties, tribes, states, whatever it may be, also don't work in isolation from each other. And so it's going to be really fascinating to carry out the STUMAP project in such a large geographic region and really look at how stewardship looks like at different scales, whether it be local scales, looking at interactions between local regions, or in looking at the broader region itself across the watersheds. Our STUMAP is also embedded within a collaborative effort to support stormwater and green infrastructure projects. And so that's pretty interesting too. And we have some specific questions to get at green infrastructure within our survey, but the entire concept of stewardship also aligns very much with these goals. So we'll go on. Here's our timeline. Looking at this is a multi-year project. You can see the timeline here going out to 2022. And currently, we're in the beginning phases. We're going to start data collection in the next couple of weeks once we finish, once our new research assistants finish their training and everything like that. And what's really unique here and important to point out is the approach to the survey itself. We're taking a very targeted, purposeful sampling approach here, meaning we want to find who are the right people or person to speak on behalf of an organization and participate in the STUMAP survey. We also don't know all the organizations out there. It's a big region. And so part of this is figuring out which all those organizations that are out there. We know that organizations sometimes have sub-programs that may be topical or geographic. And so in some cases, it may be appropriate that one person can participate in the survey on behalf of the organization. In other cases, it may make the most sense to have several people. And then we can merge that information where and when appropriate. And there's methods to deal with that. But so with that in mind, you know, we really want to put the call out there, and we want you guys to be really receptive to our research assistants when they start contacting you and looking to find the right organizations to be speaking with and the right people at those organizations. And you can also feel free to actually reach out to us if you want to give us a heads up about maybe letting us know who we should speak with at your organization to participate in the STUMAP. So yeah, reach out to us. You got the contact information. Okay, enough chitter chatter. Let's wake you up with another poll. For those of you who are still awake, what do you think was the primary stewardship type in the LA STUMAP, Los Angeles STUMAP in 2015? Did most people advocate for the environment, educate about the environment, conserve it, take care of it, monitor the environment, or restore it? What do you think? Fill out the poll. How are the responses coming in, Bryce?
They're coming in really well. Again, you all are wonderful participants.
Good. It means everyone was still awake too. That's good.
And we're just about, yeah, we hit 50 out of 57. So let's end the poll there. Y'all can see the results. And actually, you know, congratulations. I have a sense that maybe you all Googled this ahead of time, but you're right. At least based on the 140 organizations that responded to the LA STUMAP project in 2015, their primary stewardship type was to educate about the environment. All right. So we just also wanted to spend this time sort of giving you a sense of the primary types of information that we're collecting and the ways in which we'll be working with that information. And also, we're hopeful that this kind of information will be interesting to you. And during this part of the presentation, you might actually think about how your group or organization might want to work with the data, or even engage with us in other questions that you all have. So we're collecting information about 3 overarching aspects of groups. These include their organizational characteristics, their geographic turf, and their organizational networks. So just briefly sort of diving into this particular type, organizational characteristics. Those focus on the capacity and professionalization of organizations in the region. So information that helps us to understand, and for all of us to understand capacity and professionalization. We're looking for information such as the year founded, the mission of the groups, types of work sites, services offered by groups, and budgets and staff. And so here I'm showing you the publicly available database from the 2017 STU map in New York City. And I'm calling out just one individual group that's on the map here, Green Thumb New York City Parks Program. So the orange dot represents their office location, and you see here the call-out box includes information that Green Thumb agreed to share for public viewing. Okay, so keeping you maybe a little bit more active here, I've got another poll for you. All right, so let's see how this one goes. All right, third poll. So the third poll, we're sort of, again, drawing from some of the recently completed STU maps. So here, looking at New York City's 2017 STU map. The first question is, what's the average reported full-time staff of New York City groups in 2017? We've rounded this to the nearest whole number. And the second question, what is the largest number of volunteers that was reported by a stewardship group in the 2017 New York City STU map? All right, you all are amazing. I'm really impressed. I wish my classes went as well as this with interactivity. Great. Okay, so just showing you your results. It looks like folks tended to think that around 8 full-time staff members were sort of the average in New York City. Actually, the average, again, this is rounded to the nearest whole number, was 13. So actually a fairly sizable staff compared to the dominant replies in this poll. In terms of the largest number of volunteers, you've got that right. 30,115, maybe the specificity of the number gave it away, but you're right. Yeah, a wonderful outpouring of effort from the community. So in addition to asking about organizational characteristics, we're also going to be asking for groups to share their stewardship turf. StuMap defines stewardship turf, or this sort of term is often used in StuMap, and basically that means the area that a group works in and has worked in the region. And so that area varies significantly in a region like New York City or southeastern New England, such as this area. So it can include scales from a park to a forest patch to an entire watershed. The image on the right shows the overlapping stewardship turfs in New York City. So on that public portal, you can sort of further investigate the stewardship turfs by region, so you can sort of scale in. You can also investigate the kinds of stewardship and the places that groups identified as their stewardship turf. And you can also look at individual organizations and view their what they term their stewardship turf. A key part of this is to reflect that it's a participatory mapping project. So these turfs represent the regions that groups define as their own. So these aren't necessarily explicitly just the project areas, but these turfs include the entire area where a group is defining as the places where they work. All right, so given that understanding, we've got another poll for you. and keep track. Hopefully you've been keeping track of how well you've done. We've only got one more poll, so if you're tired of these, hopefully you'll grin and bear the last set. We've decided to pull information about stewardship turf and site types from some other regions. So here the first question asks, what was the median stewardship turf size in Hawaii in their stew map? And the second question, what was the primary site type reported in Chicago's stew map? All right, we're just about to our 50. I've been using that as the median. All right, so in terms of median turf size in Hawaii, it was actually 1,795 square kilometers. So quite large size in Hawaii's stew map. And in terms of the site type reported in Chicago's stew map, it was actually forest or woodland was the primary site type identified there. So yeah, some surprises I'm assuming from given the replies that you all shared. Okay, so I'll keep going. So just lastly, one of the things that we think is really useful and important for the stew map approach is the visualization and communication around the social network. So here we're showing you a view of the 2007 public database. This was the first New York City stew map. The orange lines represent the social network relationships. And these, roughly in this particular example with the lines, show the structure of the environmental stewardship across the New York City region. From a social network analysis perspective, we can assess which organizations, for example, are operating as brokers of information, organizations that operate as funders or provide services. We can also, through the social network analysis, reveal the roles of government in relation to civic stewardship organizations, and also, for example, which organizations are more isolated than others. So there's the utility side of the social network perspective is hopefully evidenced by some of those ideas. Okay, so your last poll now, trying to sort of keep you awake and interested, and hopefully, given these the sort of information that we're sharing in these polls, you might be interested in the project. So the last poll here, we've got two questions for you. The first is, what were the average number of network ties between organizations in Seattle's stew map? Again, this is from 2010, rounded to the nearest whole number. And then the last question, so hopefully you can end with a strong set of responses. The last question for today is, what were the average number of network ties between organizations in Baltimore's stew map? Again, rounded to the nearest number.
And just to clarify, everyone, a tie is like a collaboration or a partnership or something like that.
Thanks, Jesse.
Terms.
Yeah. And so there may be terms like ties or nodes or stewardship turf that you still have questions about after this presentation. So hopefully either enter them into the chat or feel free to stay on and ask them out to us, or send us an email if other things come up. Okay, we've got our 50, so I'm going to share the results now. So in Seattle, wow, it seems like the group here felt that Seattle was very strong in terms of networking. They weren't quite as strong as folks tended to believe here. From the replies in Seattle stew map, the correct answer was roughly three ties. And in Baltimore, the correct answer was actually just around one, so relatively low. Though in each of those cases, there were obviously a different number of total organizations. So the sort of average ties can also be taken with a grain of salt because of the size of the sample. Okay, so that concludes the quizzes for today and the polls. So thank you all for engaging in those, and we hope that that was interesting and sort of fun for you all. So we just wanted to sort of end with both concluding why we're working on this project, and then, as Jesse has already sort of alluded to, a bit of a call to action. So we think of mapping the social infrastructure to do. So the goal of this project, excuse me, is to map the social infrastructure to do stewardship and conservation. And we think that that reflects the SNEP network approach of building the region's adaptive capacity to climate change and environmental disturbances. One of the reasons why we think this is an important approach is that there's typically a focus on natural resources mapping, and too infrequently we map the social infrastructure that makes our governance of our natural resources possible. So the end goal of this project is to produce useful outputs for stakeholders such as yourselves in the region in order to foster collaboration and accelerate responses to climate change related efforts in the region. In addition to developing a public portal, such as was shown for the New York City examples, we're interested in discussing with groups, potentially all of you, how StewMap can be useful to you. So over the next 6 months, we'll be collecting the first round of StewMap responses and doing in-depth interviews, as Jesse commented on. And also, as we clarified, we've got interested students who've got fresh and innovative ideas for making this data useful to individuals. And so we're also really excited to work with them and generally about the opportunities ahead. So as a next step, we ask for you to take an active role in this project by participating in the survey when you're contacted by our research assistants. So that concludes the formal aspect of presentation period of this meeting. Thank you all for attending and participating in the polls. So from now for the next 15 minutes or so, feel free to stay on and ask us questions if you have them. Thank you.
Well, and should we say we'll pause for like about 20 seconds and let you all think of the burning questions and either write them down or get ready to raise your hand. We can also we will reply to some of the questions that we got ahead of time about utility and environmental justice.
Thanks, Jesse.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. I just want to get some idea of the time commitment, just so I have some knowledge as to whether and how much I can participate. Any idea?
Sure. It's a great question. So in terms of time commitment as an organization or as a group, the primary commitment will just be to fill out the survey at this time. And so that should take around 30 to 40 minutes to complete.
I think I can squeeze that in.
Great. Thanks.
And so that survey will be sent out via email to our contact email address.
That's right, Susan. So we'll have our research assistants. So we've got a list of about 500 groups that we've put together over the last around 6 months. That many of the organizations that are here shared with us their databases. So we sort of called that a database for our purposes, and we can talk more about that as well. And so in terms of reaching out, we've got our research assistants that'll be in touch with each of these groups, including your own group, and sort of finding the correct individual, as Jesse mentioned, and working with you to fill out the survey and providing you support if you need.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly to that, and I think address one also at the same time, one of the questions in the chat, which was, can you say more about the process of identifying groups, are informal groups included? So just to emphasize that our approach is to be really purposeful and targeted in having people fill out the survey. And so we're not doing like a blanket mass email or anything like that, because we really do want to just, make sure that we are getting, the quote right stewardship groups, whatever that might mean. But and that also the people best able to participate on behalf of the organization are participating. So there's a little bit of, well, having research, in some cases it may be pretty straightforward, but our research assistants will be contacting groups just to present the project and make sure we're connecting with the right person. In terms of the process of identifying groups, we've been so far working by identifying groups in a number of the coalitions around the regions, in many of the distinct watersheds. And Bryce just mentioned that list of 500. I actually am embarrassed to say I forget the exact definition of an organization that we're using. It is in our materials. But essentially, groups need to have more than 2 people. So an individual is not a group. And it does include informal groups, though I guess I'm also a little bit unclear what the definition of informal might be. But if you are an organization or a group doing stewardship, you don't need to be a formal 501c3 nonprofit or something like that. You don't, as long as you're doing a stewardship and you're a group and more than one person, yes, you would be included. I think I summarized that okay, Bryce. What do you think?
I think so, Jesse. And perhaps we also then step back if you want to say just a few comments about some of our questions that we received ahead of time. And then let's then step forward. I see, Jed, that you have your hand raised, and then we have a few other comments in the chat here. So maybe we can approach it that way. So just to say, several questions came in, and several were focused on sort of the use of the tool. And I think we have some more questions here, which are great, and I think you started to answer those. We did speak to some of those in the presentation, but there was a specific question around environmental justice that came in ahead of the presentation. And Jesse, I wasn't sure if you wanted to reply to that, and then we can also then dive into these other questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll kind of also link to the first question about use of the tool. I mean, I think we did outline hopefully some of the uses throughout the presentation in terms of identifying opportunities, synergies for groups to work together. And I think it's also important to emphasize that not everyone need collaborate with everyone. I mean, there's a point you could spend your entire day collaborating and not get anything done. And so it's also about being strategic and finding the right partnerships where there's really value added in the different types of partnerships as well, whether it's working together or just sharing information, etc. But this topic of environmental justice was really great that somebody brought that up. And I think we want to start by saying the StewMap project that we're doing does not formally or explicitly address environmental justice, and that is not designed explicitly to deal with environmental justice issues. But much of the information that we're gathering address topics of environmental justice, whether it's the focus that groups are working on, what they think needs to be addressed in the region, understanding which groups might be isolated or which regions might be isolated, or where there may not be a lot of work being done, or where there may be lots of work being done. So through mapping, spatially mapping, and also mapping partnership networks, we're really able to look at a lot of patterns that can tell us a lot of things about environmental justice issues. But then it comes down to what are the specific environmental justice issues that people might be interested in. And so we would really love groups to come back to us if they have such questions like that and say like, hey, these are the topics that we're really interested in. Within the bounds of what you're doing and the information you're gathering, how might we address these concerns? And so I think the StewMap data can at times, be really useful also for identifying some of the right questions to be asking, or maybe putting the right people in communication, getting the dialogue going to address those issues. But those issues probably require oftentimes a little bit more focused research or attention.
Thanks, Jesse. There may be additional questions folks have about that. I'm just now going, so feel free to enter those in the comments. I'm going to go back just to the order that questions came in. I received a question from David, and we saw one publicly that I think that we've replied to. But David, do you have additional questions related to the identification of groups or definition of organizations?
No, that was really helpful. I thought that was a great answer. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, David.
Thumbs up. Thank you.
Katie, I see that you've asked us to return to the timeline slide, so I am more than happy to do that. So I will just, again, share my screen and go back to that slide. Oh. Let's see if I can do that. Manage. Okay. So here I am on the timeline slide. Do you have specific questions you have about the timeline, Katie, that you'd like us to reply to? If you're still here. I'm just asking you to unmute in case you're still here. I'll just reply then, just to say that currently we're still in sort of the sort of end of phase one. So we've built out, as I mentioned, the stewardship database. So we started with the stormwater coalitions and collaboratives in the region and green infrastructure coalitions as well. So we started there and also worked to identify other major sort of collaborations of environmental stewardship groups. And then we also worked with some of the large scale nonprofits in the region to identify groups working with individuals from those organizations to build out the database. So we've been working on that, and we've also been working with many of those partners who are also many of them are part of the SNEP network to iterate on the survey. And the goal of working on the survey and iterating on it is to ensure that the questions are responsive to the needs and interests of this region. So Jesse mentioned, for example, we added a set of explicit questions around green infrastructure, which is a particular focus of the SNEP network. And so we're just beginning data collection, so still just in phase one, and that'll roll over into phase two, which will be that continuation where our research assistants will be helping us to outreach to all of you to find the explicit person, helping you to navigate the use of the tool and entry of your data, especially the mapping data. We'll be working to clean that data in phase two, and also conducting some follow-up interviews. And concurrently doing some data analysis and hopefully providing some early descriptive statistics related to that. Jesse, or Lynn or Kurt, anything I missed there around our timeline?
No, but I might just, we might mention too that because, we have some really interested students who are going to be working with us. There's also, maybe there's the potential also for, they might have some little aspects that they may also be looking to find out more about for their own projects or something like that. So there's a little bit of room for something interesting to, well, not that the rest isn't interesting, but just to say that, yeah, I think there's a little bit of adaptability built into all this.
Thanks, Jesse. So just again, going down the line here, I see that Sheila has a question. So Sheila, would you like to ask that out loud? Do you clarify more around the question, or we can just reply to your question, Sheila Dormandy?
Thanks, Bryce. Yeah, so mostly I was looking for some examples. Here in Rhode Island, we are famous for our 2 degrees of separation between any 2 humans in Rhode Island. And so it's not like New York City where it's a more complicated way to connect with people. So I'm curious what sort of things have happened. How have people organized differently because they had a stew map, or like what did they learn that changed how they were doing? And what's your hypothesis about how this might inform how we organize here in Rhode Island and in southeastern Massachusetts too, of course.
Sure. Thanks, Sheila. Well, it's a complex question, and there we might need another hour or so to really dive into the sort of like the full complexity of a reply to be sufficient. I can speak a little bit to that, and Jesse also feel free to jump in as well. One thing I would say just about the region, even here in Rhode Island, is to say that I have heard a number of comments anecdotally from organizations that in fact they weren't aware of, for example, friends groups or small scale groups that were working in certain regions that they had attempted to respond to, either developing an emergency response to some environmental disturbance or something like that, for example, like a cleanup. So we have heard that anecdotally, and certainly there's the increasing development of networks in the region, like around the Taunton and of course Blackstone and other spaces where many groups are trying to build and strengthen collaborations and coalitions, and so they have identified this project in particular as potentially serving some of their goals, which is to identify both individuals and groups. I'd say in terms of other examples, for example, in Hawaii, though they're still working with some of the data and sort of making sense of it, some of the narratives that folks have talked about are that it's some of the changes are that folks are able to clarify where activities were happening, and also to claim some of the kinds of actions of care that are going on that weren't sort of represented in the sort of formal governance in Hawaii. So those are some sort of, again, fairly anecdotal comments, but I'd have to come back with you for more formal replies here. But just sort of, I think some of the work and some of the things that we can speak to are just having a much more robust and diverse set of conversations around who is doing work, and understanding a larger set of governance actors. We can also say that there are, for example, in after Hurricane Sandy in New York City in 2013, a number of different agencies and researchers and others intending to support community responses to the impacts of Hurricane Sandy used the 2007 STU map as a way to identify partnerships and to sort of advance a lot of that work. And so on the ground efforts were definitely supported by the New York City STU map after Hurricane Sandy. That's just an anecdotal, again, example, but Jesse, do you have anything else you'd want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can also give just one example from some work that I've done in around Puget Sound, and that actually wasn't a STUMAP project, but it was a project doing very similar work, mapping collaborations for salmon recovery and looking at where organizations were working. And I know in presenting that information at regional conferences, I had a lot of local practitioners actually come up to me and tell me things such as that the data and the maps that we had produced confirmed many things that they had assumed, but that it was incredibly helpful for them to now take this and bring it to their managers or other people to argue for the types of changes that they had kind of themselves been seeing. So it was kind of providing the evidence and the data that they needed to make those arguments. So I think that's another example right there.
Thanks, Jesse. And Sheila, I see you said thanks, but just checking with you, and also I see that that Mary Jo Feuerbach also asked a similar question. So just putting it out to either of you if you still had other questions related to that. Great, nice use of the reactions, Sheila. I like it. April, I see you have a question here related to sort of not duplicating efforts and related efforts going on in Massachusetts with the Massey Can network. Just wondering if you wanted to add to more of your comment there, if you're still on.
Hey, Bryce.
Yep.
This is Kurt. I just want to add one sort of strategic point that speaks to Sheila's question. So once we have the visualization of where stewardship is and where it's not, I think that's vital to resource managers. Having sat in seats where you're looking at a place and you're saying, well, how do I ensure this place is being stewarded better? How do I ensure it's adapting to climate change better? How do I ensure it's there's new or best practices spreading across this area? The visualization is really important. So then you see if there's a hole, a lack of connection to certain parts of the watershed or the geography. I think the larger implicit point here is that you need to have everything, good network, things are moving everywhere, well, everywhere. So we don't have holes in our game. So maybe things are great, let's say in South County, but not so good in, let's say, East Providence, which has some coastline. So we can start to focus on making connections and hopefully getting peer-to-peer conversations going. Not always the usual, well, here's the government, we're here to help you, but actually, oh, this group over here has some really cool information to share with you. Often that can be more effective than the usual process of top-down communication.
Thanks, Kurt. Related to that, and just going back then to the duplicating effort idea, we have been staying in contact with SNEP subcommittees. I happen to be on the ecosystem services subcommittee, and so I've been sort of staying abreast of some of the developing projects, especially around ecosystem services and some of the work there. If others know of or would be or think we should be in contact with other efforts like Massey can, please let us know and please put them in touch with us, and we'd be happy to make sure that we're all building something greater than our individual parts. Thank you. Jed, I see you have a question here. I don't know if you're still on. You also had your hand raised. You're ever patient. So just wondering if you wanted to speak more to your question around updating the map. We can also speak to that.
Sure. Thanks, Bryce. Really a pretty simple question. Just wondering how the map is kept up to date over time. I can certainly see it being useful, but if it's not kept current, I can see that utility really waning over time. So I was hoping you could speak to how that's going to be addressed.
Yeah, thanks. At the moment, the approach that we're taking is, more research-oriented approach in terms of, intentional outreach to groups. There are precedents with other STU maps of then after the initial data collection, providing a portal for groups to add or change their information sort of later on, and so that's something that we're talking about and thinking about, but we don't have a formal process for that yet. But that's definitely a part of our thinking. But a definite approach that we're taking is to do a series of these. So our goal is to launch this, to do this first round of data collection, follow up with interviews, and then within a near-term cycle, launch another round of STUMAP to sort of compare, still within the 5-year SNEP network effort. It really depends on our initial response rate and the ways in which we're able to navigate, many of the challenges of identifying the right person and getting information, and also figuring out what the data looks like when it comes in, because some of the spatial data that we'll receive from groups, we'll have to work with for a period, especially when we receive GIS files from groups. So that will take some time, but our goal is to have at least a second round of data collection.
Jed, it's Kurt again. Hopefully this stays as a important part of the Southern New England program too, once we get the foundation built. If things keep happening as we hope and the SNEP program keeps getting funded, we'd like to think we can stay in that realm, so the continued funding, which is absolutely necessary. You make a great point. It takes
Great, thanks guys.
Thanks, Jed. Yeah.
Day.
And I'll also add that we've also discussed, ways that the STU map could be made where a little bit more citizen science oriented. And so that could be something, once we get a baseline that we look into down the road as well. And so that would reduce the time and cost of collecting data, and could improve the frequency at which the data is updated. Ideas.
Yeah. And Jed, if you have other ideas or if other folks have desires for that, we're also really interested in finding where there are synergies there. So just to sort of clarify, one, also we're just about to at 2:00. I'm sure many folks have to go. I see Mary Jo. Let's see. I think we've responded to your question, but Jenny Sanders, you've got an easy one. Yes, we're recording this presentation, so that's easy to reply to. And then the last question I see in our list in the comments is from Heidi Ricci. Heidi, we can reply to that, but do you have any other context that you wanted to add to your question? If you're still here. Well, we can just say, yes, we are going to contact more than one person especially a large organization like Mass Audubon. So we're aware that in large organizations like Mass Audubon, one individual might not likely can't speak for the entire organization, even if just focusing on the southeastern New England region. So yes, one of the primary responsibilities of our research assistants is to do that outreach with organizations, especially those large scale organizations, and identify the appropriate scale, essentially the largest scale, but the appropriate scale by which an individual can speak to comprehensively their particular kind of stewardship. So an example, again, using Mass Audubon, likely there'll be a number of different units represented in our efforts and on the map. There may be a time when we need to, for example, in the public portal, depending on how that comes together, we may need to bring all of that one organization like Mass Audubon together in the representation on that final public portal, depending on, in terms of working with the data and working with that portal. But in terms of data collection, that will be our approach.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's going to have many benefits doing this process. I mean, among other things, it's going to make more people aware that the SNP network exists. And even within our organization that we're involved in it, although we've shared that information a number of times, but sometimes people have to hear things multiple times before they really pick up on it. And then I think that for large organizations, gathering all this information in one place, honestly, I don't think that there is anybody within our organization who has all this at their fingertips. And the fact that you're going to be putting it all into a database is going to be useful for us as well as in working with partners.
Nice. Thanks. Thank you, Sheila. Or thanks you, Heidi. Sorry. My apologies. So okay, we're just at after 2:00 now. Thank you all for offering questions and comments and staying with us as we sort of work through clarifying the project. Any last comments or questions for us before we go?
And also feel free to get in contact with us, via email or something like that.
All right. Well, thank you all. It was a pleasure to present the project to you. We're really excited to work with you all. Thank you, Jesse, Lynn, Kurt, and thank you, Leah, for managing this all. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.